All right.
Lucy, did you want to say something?
Well, before you could hear anything, I just wanted to let everybody know that I have loved the email conversations. They've been very meaningful for me. I've had a super busy week with house guests, and they're still here, but I've found another room to hide away in. But I've loved the comments, and almost agree with every single email. It's just very helpful to hear the way these topics bounce around with, what takes a good person, and what a wonderful book to end with about friendship and love and family, because that's who I have here with me this weekend. And it makes me think about all the people I've lost that I cherished too, that are no longer living, and the things that they did for me and that I did for them. I want to reread this book 3 times, because it seems like that's what I have to do with Aristotle, is reread it, and to get it to sink in a little bit. It is such a good time to do this with our political problems in the world, the global problems. And it just brings me back to a place where I'd rather be with my thinking. I'm watching less news. I'm less concerned about all these other things that are going on, and this is a good time to pay attention to this work. So I appreciate it.
I'd like to. I'm sorry. Please.
Go ahead, Ron.
I just wanted to thank whoever contributed that marvelous letter about
O'Donnell.
I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry about
the priest.
Good habits. About that was so Aristotelian in its essential insights. The way in which this hierarchy of character exercises needed to be performed in order to climb the ladder to someone who was truly cultivated and who truly embraced the graciousness that comes with good habitual performance. After that would not have meant as much to me if we weren't all reading Aristotle, but again, with Aristotle as the background, I mean, the echoes and the resonances and the amplification, it just echoed in my head. I really appreciated that. So whoever sent that in, thank you very much. Very provocative.
Sure. Yeah.
Beautiful letter.
Yeah. One thing, you can imagine why I chose this to be the last chapter for us to read, because in it, Aristotle says a lot about forms of government and the role that we play toward in our society. Any comments about that part of this chapter?
Well, I thought it amplified his in chapter 1, where he highlighted statesmanship as being a high good, and this amplified my understanding of what he might have meant by statesmanship, as not just being politics, but also affection, commitment, common good. Issues, things like that, which I found to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the last few pages here, I think, are a kind of quick preview of the politics, where Aristotle, in his sort of scientific, empirical way, takes an inventory of the existing forms of government of the time, and analyzes them according to how well each performs the essential function of cultivating virtue in its citizens. And of course, being being a product of ancient Greece, he comes to very different conclusions than we would today. He doesn't give democracy terribly high marks.
Although it's the best of the bad ones.
It's the best of the bad.
Yeah.
That's right. And if that's all you can say for it, well, maybe well.
What is bad? What is bad about a democracy?
Oh, it's not tyranny.
According
but
to Aristotle.
I'm trying to remember that table he has where the
Oh,
and I'm drawing a blank on it where it lists every form of government and how it goes bad, tyranny, but I'm drawing a blank on what he said about democracy.
yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah. Well, as I recall, he says that the danger of democracy is bad because it can so easily slip into tyranny.
That's it.
Yeah, it's page 206.
Which is the worst of the bad.
Which is the worst, yeah. So it can go from the best of the worst to the worst of the worst.
That's saying a lot of good things about
A
democracy.
situation that we seem to be facing today, without going there.
Yes.
It's so hard not to, isn't it?
Keep sticking your toe in the water there for us.
Aristotle, in some senses, Colleen, following the tradition of Plato, in the sense that the good person has an obligation for statesmanship. The good person has an obligation for trying to make the government a better place. Of course, in Plato, that's what philosophers did. It seems, and I think certainly I'm projecting here, but maybe our founding fathers, I think, had that similar point of view that they didn't. I don't think that they looked at their work in creating a democracy as being. I think they viewed it as being this is what you should do, and I think sadly in America today that's being lost. I mean, the idea is that you promote the common good, you try to make the government work. I don't see that as being as important today. Certainly, it's less important today than when Aristotle wrote, where you specifically are supposed to do that.
But I'm not sure they created a democracy. They created a constitutional republic, and I think that was pretty Aristotelian.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I mean,
and I think we suffer because of that today.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and they were very sensitive to keeping slavery alive.
Yes.
The institution of slavery.
Well, but that's Aristotelian too, because I was just making some notes before we came on. The way I see it, he didn't like short people, old people,
right.
old people, young people, slaves or women. We're all in some inferior position to what Aristotle thought he was, and how he thought that had been bestowed upon him. I've got to reread this whole thing again, I think.
But they tried. I guess that would be the point.
It's imperfect.
Very right.
Yeah, they created a Republican, as Lance said, which created a filter, if you will, of good citizens drawn from the body politic, and between he was counting on that filtered group of people who were elected representatives to have sufficient virtue to make good judgments, and that was what they saw as the strongest possible inclusion of democracy, but an assurance of virtue is to have elected representatives.
Of course, that recalls the famous comment by Benjamin Franklin when he emerged from the convention and was asked, what kind of government have you given us? And he said, a republic if you can keep it.
You can keep
And wasn't it, Charlie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Madison who was so worried about keeping allegiance to a king?
Well, yes. I mean, they all the assembled masses and the convention were concerned about, getting away from that. It was a natural tendency among some of the people to want a single leader, but they wanted to reinforce the value of individual voices, but they didn't trust the grand collection of them who were susceptible to this or that. So they constructed this representative form of government, the Republican locase, and that was their safeguard, if you will. And I don't know if anybody saw the footnotes I attached in my communication, where Madison explicitly explains his confidence, which is quite challengeable, that there will be virtue enough among the elected representatives.
Well, the fundamental difference, I think, between Aristotle and Madison's approach to structuring government was ultimately Aristotle was looking to screen out non-virtuous participants. So he was looking to use qualification criteria to come as close as he could to a core of voters and civic activists who were virtuous. And Madison was using a set of checks and balances, different substructures of the government to offset each other, and to make corrective and purifying decisions, failing the choice of a virtuous individual at the head of government or in charge of government. So the two approaches, I think, were alike in that they both had doubts about democratic process, but I think they also offered very different approaches to how to achieve it. And again, as we're all experiencing now, it's a very slippery slope. I mean, the edges are smooth, and it's easy to fall from a democracy into something else. God forbid, a tyranny.
But what neither Madison nor Aristotle were able to hit upon is that by filtering in the way they filtered, and Aristotle, I guess, wanted tall male non-slaves those were the virtuous people in his estimation. But by excluding everyone else from that, we have a very homogenized kind of society, which is more prone to failure than if everybody that they excluded was included.
Oh, interesting point.
We now know.
To include women and people without property and slaves.
Yeah, people without property and people who were property.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I don't misunderstand. I wasn't advocating. I was simply declaring and observing.
Yeah. And of course, we in some of our states, maybe even most of them, I don't know, we don't allow bad people to vote. Bad people being those who are in prison.
Or who have even...
Those who have been in prison.
Yes, those who have been convicted of felonies.
Yeah.
And having once been convicted of a felony, you are deprived of your right to vote in many places.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you can still be president.
Apparently. But in
But you can't work at McDonald's.
You can't work at McDonald's.
Okay, well, yeah, I'd love to hear your responses to the two emails that I sent out, one 2 days ago and then late last night. Lance, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm continuing to ponder it, Forrest. So I think you were successful in addressing it. I think I have a thing about, and I didn't realize this until I've been involved with you in these courses, that I got a thing with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle that I never thought I'd have. And Richard pulled out one of his old papers that he had with you, and I found some of my old blue books. And I don't know whether they still
Wow.
use blue books in college or not, but we did. And I had one on Jean-Paul Sartre, and I think the topic was existence before essence. I believe that was the concept. I got a B plus, which was pretty good for me in my philosophy course at the time. But your answer was quite good, and I continue to think about it, but I'm just not sure I can come to grips with the Aristotelian concepts.
Yeah. But you do.
And by the way, I got a fun fact. Jean-Paul Sartre was only 5 feet tall. So, Aristotle's view, could never be beautiful, but
no, he would be unattractive.
James was about 5'2", so there you go.
But you do understand that by philosopher, he meant something different.
yes, and I've actually looked into that. I appreciate that thought.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking that among those people, there would be stronger and less strong candidates. For instance, we do give Nobel prizes in physics, and the people who get those are supposedly scientists who have a bigger impact than other scientists, other physicists who are teaching high school, let's say, or even college and working with students in a lab. So there are more important and less important scientists in all different fields.
Yeah, well, the Nobel Prize certainly makes that distinction. There are no points for being a good teacher.
Yeah.
And in fact, because of Nobel's, the rumor is his wife was fooling around with a mathematician, and that's why you don't have a Nobel Prize in mathematics. So mathematicians invented their own prize that is also, to my knowledge, teaching is not really a big deal in awarding that prize either. It's all theoretical mathematics. So yeah, there is that hierarchy built into all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think one of the other points that you made in that piece is right on. That is that natural philosophy, or science as we know it today, has become increasingly gregarious, more and more collectivist, more and more reliant on teams to do scientific work, more cross-referencing, even across national borders, let alone laboratory borders. And this isn't just a sociological feature of modern science. It's the essence. I mean, somebody named Thomas Kuhn about 20 years ago wrote a book about the nature of scientific revolutions. And he had a huge impact about how even scientists thought about their work. and he suggested that there were these paradigms, these versions of the way nature worked, which were tested collectively, which were tested through literature review, through the award of prizes like the Nobel, which were determined by committee, and that the nature of science itself had become less individualistic, less strictly empirical, and more social. And I think that's consistent with your observations in that think piece that you sent back out to all of us.
I didn't point out in that piece that there are certain mathematicians who are for Aristotle maybe highest in the category, and they are not scientists. They work with these mathematical puzzles that don't necessarily have any practical use at all.
Well, I think there is that, like a better word, bias. It's mental. I think it's the mind. So what you can do in mathematics, and though this is disputed, but you can at least theoretically develop all these mathematical systems without getting your hands dirty in dealing with the empirical existence of the world. And I think that kind of mental activity would have been very appealing to Aristotle, in the sense of that's kind of the ultimate virtue of the good person, is he studies, but he's studying these things that are really locked into your head. And mathematics, of course, is being one of them. Plato loved mathematics too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, mathematics was coming into its own in some ways during their lifetimes. With Plato, for those of you who read the Meno with me, there was that little discussion about a triangle and how do you double the area of a square?
I still can't figure out how that slave was able to get that, and I can't figure it out still. So.
I think that was leading questions.
Leading questions.
What is it? That was a leading question.
Can I tell a personal anecdote that connects a couple of these conversations about friendship and the Nobel? When I was 15, I went to a boarding school in Connecticut, and I was a new boy, and I was put in a room with another new boy who I didn't know, and we hadn't been there long, and we had to turn out lights at 9:30 or 10. And after lights, early in our acquaintanceship, he says to me, "What's your goal in life?" And I'm 15, and I hesitated, as you might expect. And I said, "Well, I suppose it's to be a grandfather." And he says to me, and I said, "What's yours?" He quickly answered, "I want to discover the cure for cancer." In 1994, this is previously 1955, in 1994, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine.
Wow.
And over the span of that, he died in 2008. And I have his obituary here, which I haven't looked at in a long time, but we were great pals the rest of our lives.
Charlie, can you read his name? I can't see the
Alfred Goodman Gilman. His
Thank you.
obituary was in the New York Times on December 27th, 2015, and I still carry on my phone my last conversation with him, which was a week before he died.
Oh.
Anyway, it connected up. Thank you for this. I'm a little emotional, frankly. These Aristotelian criteria, if you will. When I think back, his middle name was Goodman, Alfred Goodman Gilman. Hello.
Of course, he had to be.
And,
Yeah.
then I thought, was he pleasurable? Yes, we were always buddies. And was he useful to me? Yeah. And I remembered in senior year, I was floundering around in honors chemistry, and he went to the trouble to reduce the whole course to 8 pages. He says, Yonkers, just if you know this stuff, you'll be able to do fine. That's all I studied, and then I got a B plus like Lance. I thought I'd gone to heaven.
Did you achieve grandfatherhood?
Yes, 6 times. And so
Well,
we talked about that back in 2003 when we were both alive and kicking, and that about because he had already become a Nobel laureate. Anyway,
Wow.
Alfred Goodman Gilman. Wow.
Good.
Thank you.
yeah.
Sorry to digress, but I thought it was pertinent, and I couldn't help but tell a story.
Well, it's relevant too because you kept that friendship so long, and of course Aristotle talks about what does it take to keep long-term friends, and it involves effort and time and energy. Forrest and I talked about this yesterday. That's why you can't have 1,000 good friends. You just don't have the energy, time, bandwidth in today's world. So you and he kept that going. I think Aristotle would have been impressed and said that's exactly what friendship is about.
Here's my take on that. I grew up the son of a Navy officer, so we moved every 2 or 3 years throughout up until I went to college, and I went to 3 high schools, for example. And in each place, I would make friends and then move on. And there were usually a couple of people I would correspond with for a while, at least. And there are a handful of people with whom I kept relationships going, who are still close friends. A couple of years ago, I began thinking about some of the people who had dropped by the wayside in my life. And I thought, kind of in the way of tying up loose ends, I would, if I had the opportunity, I wasn't going to turn this into some sort of a holy grail quest, but if I had the opportunity, I would look people up whom I remembered. I'd try to locate them. I'd look them up if I was in the area, and essentially compare memories with them. I think that's what prompted this more than anything else. The fact that memory is so tricky, and so many of the things that we remember, the people who were part of that memory don't remember or remember very differently. We've all had that experience, I'm sure. Well, I was in Oregon 2 or 3 years ago, close to the home of a fellow who had lived across the street from me in high school in Bremerton, Washington, for 2 years. We walked to school together every day. He was actually a couple of years older than I was, but we were friends. And I didn't have his email address, and I don't know that I would have sent an email ahead even if I had. I wanted to see what would happen if I knocked on the door, which is what I did. And somewhat to my surprise, and certainly to my embarrassment, he had absolutely no memory of me. Every prompt that I gave him, and I could name all of his siblings. I had kept up with them on, through the internet. I knew what had happened. I knew which ones had died and when and so forth. None of that, of course, was necessarily what I was trying to do was establish that I'm not a fake. This is anyway. After about 10 minutes, it was not only embarrassing for me, but of course it was embarrassing for him. I was looking for something that he just was not able to give me. my wife was sitting in the car. I hadn't planned this very well, and she needed a bathroom. So even in the best of circumstances, I'm not sure what kind of ground we could have covered. But anyway, I just had to beat a hasty retreat. Now, I had no real stake in this friendship. This was just a guy I had known, and we were ships passing in the night. But I have to say that there are other friendships that have fallen by the wayside that were important to me at a time. But this experience has somewhat chilled my desire to follow up on those, for fear that somebody I really did care about at one time might also not care about me enough to have remembered me. It gets into Aristotle's discussion of what we might call asymmetrical relationships. Not everybody, you might call something friendship, but the two people might be getting very different things, and very different quantities of things. So thank you.
Yeah, he used the word proportionality. I don't think I've ever used that word or seen it, but it relates, I think, Richard, to our perceptions of whether or not a relationship is proportional. That's not a measuring stick I've ever used, but
I think if you have lived in a lot of places, your life becomes compartmentalized, and the people you knew in that place are more vivid to you than this fellow had lived in one place for probably all up until he graduated from high school, and I think he went into the service, and so there were lots of people who were part of that, whereas for me it was a little 2-year slice of my life, and so it was unfair. I shouldn't have done it. I felt very badly that I'd put him into a situation like this where he was kind of helpless. And I think well, anyway, enough said.
Yeah, let me share a story. When I was in the Army, I was in the dental unit, which was made up of some people who were going to become dentists or dental assistants, and then maybe some others, but largely athletes. I had played basketball in college, and then I played basketball in basic training in the Army. Somebody knew me, and one of my friends in our barracks was Dick Atha. Dick Atha had come from a kind of a small town, I think, in Indiana. He had been a star in college at one of the minor Indiana universities, maybe Ball State. And after, during his Army service, during our Army service, I got to go to Paris, and he was shipped overseas quite late in his service time, and got in touch with me. He was down in a base in southeastern France, and so he came to Paris, and I could show him around Paris. He especially wanted to see Place Pigalle, which was known as the place where the prostitutes hung out. Anyway, after his service, he tried out for the New York Knicks and played basketball for the New York Knicks for a number of years. And I don't think that I kept in touch with him during that time, and years went by. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to get in touch with him, and I found his phone number. He had, and I read about him. He had become a member of the Indiana Sports Hall of Fame. He had been a coach at a high school, and then he became the athletic director. And so there was a lot of information about him, and so I could get his phone number, call him up. So I called him up and I said, Dick, this is Forrest Hansen, Woody. He said, "Oh, I've just been thinking about you recently." And here was all these years had passed, and we had a conversation as if no time had passed. And he wanted me to call him again sometime. In the meantime, his wife died. She'd been quite ill when I called, and then he died. But anyway, there's this little spark of a friendship that could have been revived, in spite of our not keeping in touch with over the years. Strange thing about friendships.
But Ron mentioned the word mapping when he was describing his reaction to the chapter, and I found that useful to however you interpret the word mapping. It's an arraying, if you will, of issues, and then the names started to come, the memories started to come, and so I splashed them across the page and then reassembled them into some order, trying to use Aristotle's criteria, useful, etc. And I thought of the different categories he uses, like he used the word mates, mates. And he talked about soldiers' friendships and sailors' friendships as being, material to not just getting the job done, but protecting each other, helping each other, enabling each other to survive, etc. All these different criteria. Not having ever been in the military, I didn't know that, but having been in a law firm partnership, I understood some distinctions. But anyway, the mapping term that Ron used, I thought was helpful to see old and new, changed circumstances, like Richard, who's moved around a lot. You hop from geographic place to geographic time frame, and anyway, see what you come up with.
Yeah, I'm uncertain, about how to classify friendships. I'll give you another anecdote, and this concerns my black federal judge friend, whose mother was a domestic, who I mentioned a couple sessions ago. It turned out, of course, that he became only the second black federal judge at that particular point in time appointed to the bench in the Baltimore Federal District Court. I sat in on a court session just on the off chance that we could talk, because we had been very close friends 15 or 20 years before that. And we walked out of the federal courthouse together in Baltimore, and we were standing on Baltimore and Charles Street. And he turned to me and he said, "Lance, would you be kind enough to hail a cab for me?" I said, and I don't know, I said, how I am. I said something probably a little too flippant. And he says, "Yeah, I'm on the federal bench." He says, "But I still can't get a cab to stop for me." He had never learned how to drive because he said his mother could never afford a car, and this, that, and the other thing. And I felt, both a certain sadness and a certain guilt about it. And I thought maybe we could renew our friendship, but there was just something about that particular moment that precluded me from following up on it. I'm very sad about that. Now, of course, he's retired. I'm retired. We're all living in different places, but it's an odd thing, I think, friendship. And I'm not sure that Aristotle really addresses every nuance of friendship the way it ought to be addressed. But
Well,
that's my poignant story.
Yeah, no, I think what he does address that on some level. I think he uses the word equality, equal, in the same line of thinking where he uses proportionality.
Yeah.
And what you experienced, Lance, was, your old friendship before he was a judge and so forth, and then, but suddenly you saw this horrific on the street reality that there was always going to be a gulf.
Yeah.
between you and he, and that therefore it was not a fruitful pursuit as a closer friendship.
Well, Aristotle does describe different functions that friendships execute in relationships between individuals. Some of them are utilitarian and are sort of concrete goal oriented, and some are shorter lived and more pleasure oriented, and some are based on the bedrock of virtuous behavior, of values that are longstanding and that are tested in the back and forth between friends. And it seems to me that this discussion about friendship, coming as it does at the end of the set of lectures, is significant. I mean, friendships are a kind of marker. They're a kind of lifelong proof of virtuous performance, of the sustainability of values that once defined two individuals, and certainly define their relationship as well, which either withstand the wear and tear of a long life or don't. And so, I mean, clarifying the if you will, philosophical significance of friendships, classifying them into these categories and identifying certain ones which are completely reinforcing and uplifting of the messages about virtue and character that we find in earlier chapters, I think is completely fitting and appropriate and a good way to end the book. It makes what was in previous chapters a little more theoretical and a little more, what shall I say, speculative, into something quite concrete and something that visits every individual's life experience. I mean, we aspire, all of us either have friends or we have aspired at one point in our lives to have friends. Does that make any sense? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That makes a
Lovely.
lot of sense.
Friendships seem to be very fragile, as democracy and other things that Aristotle describes. That list is always something I'm turning back to. The list of falling short, being in the middle, and going too far. There is some fragility to that. I know we've all had friends where if either friend has to work too hard to keep it up, that's the friendship that kind of, loses its bond pretty easily. If someone gets upset about something because it didn't meet their standard, the friendship won't endure. Or, that can also speak to having, similar experiences but different memories of the same experience. And I can't help but to think about friendships between men and friendships between women and the differences there, with the women having been more, possibly not uniformly, but more nurturing and more cultivating through the years to maintain the friendship. Then, I can think of men who don't really keep close touch with their daughters and son as much as women may do that. When the daughter or the son calls from out of town to catch up, it's the father is on the phone for 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, and the mother ends up on the phone for 20 minutes to an hour with. There just seems to be a little bit of a difference there, and I think the fragility, how fragile friendships can be. And then those ones that doesn't matter what time has passed, you go right back to where you left off. It's just automatic that those are the friendships that, as being in my 70s, I can go back to friends that I had in grade school and high school, and you just pick right up. It's just like the trust is there. It's all right there. You could tell each other anything, despite the time that has transpired, which is really kind of a miracle. Or not miracle, I don't know what the right word is, but it's just very warm.
A blessing.
A blessing. Thank you.
And
Lucy,
clearly, that's an issue that Aristotle just isn't even aware of, the possibilities of women being as much friends as men, the possibility of women being as much citizens as men. That whole topic is outside of his experience and outside of the experience of the Greek population.
well,
So,
also outside of his,
I
I was to say, and also not only outside of his experience, but outside of him caring about it.
yeah,
It's I think Lucy made a great observation about the different role in parenting. And in fact, my wife is next week is going out to Fort Collins, Colorado for a week because our daughter is having a difficult time. And it's not, I mean, I guess I could have gone, but I'm not sure I wouldn't have been a third wheel when I'm out there in terms of my daughter's choice of the mother being the right person for empathy and support. And when Aristotle talks about children, I mean it's very transactional. Uh, the kids don't like the parents as much because they haven't been around them as much for as long a period of time. It's not a warm, fuzzy feeling of parenthood either in Aristotle.
No.
yeah. Dodie, you haven't had a chance to speak. What are some of your thoughts, Dodie? Do you want to?
But at some point, well, I missed last week and just listening to the recording didn't really do it. But I just want to say to everyone that I'm honored to be in this group. I never studied any philosophy or sociology, and I signed up to these courses hoping I'd let it just wash over me and take from it, whatever value is available to me. So I actually am beholden to all of you because you're doing the course and I'm just receiving whatever you offer. So I have very little to say. I'm just amazed at the amount of reasoning and what was I said to my husband, scholarship that's obvious here. And I appreciate that.
I do too. Thank you.
Okay. About Dodie mentioned reasoning, and I would say that kind of underneath this whole lecture or set of lectures is Aristotle's attempt to say what is special about human beings. We are animals. We are animals who need sustenance and who defecate and so on, like other animals. But there's something special about us, and for him, as Dodie suggests about all of you, it is reasoning. Human beings reason. So a human being is a reasoning animal. Now, how does that play a part in being a good person?
Well, I think what I like is that another term that he uses is lovable. And we all have instinctual love for our children, but there is an extra dimensional capacity, if you will, in humans to extend beyond the natural to a friendship relationship, which is born out of other qualities. It's not just because they're your child or your father or your sister or brother. And he distinguishes, again, using Ron's mapping word, when if you draw a circle and you put in the circle you and then the people who are closest to you over time, mother, father, sister, brother, cousins, family, etc., and then you begin to extend the circle outward, you find it being populated with your reasoning as to people who you found to be lovable for criteria, for whatever reasons along the way, whether it was as a friend, a pal, a teammate, a partner, a lover. All of these, the circle gets interestingly bigger as you, and what factors are at play? Well, I think he's saying that humans are unique in the sense of having the capacity to think that through.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
But I think there's also another sense, and that has to do with people who not just act on principles that they've inculcated, that they've been habituated to, that are part of who they are because of their upbringing and their friendship associations. But we also have the ability to step beyond that being in the experience and to look from the outside at the process of embracing these values, wherever they come from, and understanding them in some hierarchical and logical order, making rational sense of them, as it were. So at the same time that we are affected, we are by the environment in which we develop. We're also effective of our own character and our own direction by virtue of this distinct human capability.
Well,
How do we go about embracing them?
Embracing which is that the virtues?
Yeah.
Well, one way I think is through friendships, is through practicing principles, the ones that were discussed in Chapter 8, actively with regard to cultivating other individuals that we find to be estimable and virtuous personalities, people that we use as mirrors and as reinforcing agents. So some of it has to do with selectivity. Some of it has to do with transforming emotional bonds into constitutions, into personal what shall I say, prescriptions for good life. In the case of city-states, into constitutions and bills of and laws and legal frameworks. I mean, the way we act on that depends on the context, of course, and the level of the social dialogue and discourse. But there are he lays out a lot of different ways in which we are inclined to practice our rationality, our most human attribute.
yeah,
Well, I would say that one of the ways we get there is through education, being aware more explicitly. I mean, I've benefited from this in retrospect. I see. I also, like Dodie, never studied any of this stuff, and I find it so useful at this stage of my life to look back and use these different filters. But the earlier that you can get them, the more educative you perhaps will be over time as you live life's experiences. And I I have a grandson who is now a sophomore at Georgetown, and last year he had a course that was called the question what was called the question of God. And this year he has an ethics requirement. And he's reading stuff that we've been reading. Thank you, Forrest. And something I was not required to do and elected not to do. Um, so I think the earlier you're attuned to some of these criteria, standards, and things, the better.
I also think, following up on what, because of my participation in the class, I've become reanimated in looking up philosophy. Um, Aristotle, for example, he was a very keen observer of nature, and he noticed that animals play. And of course, anyone that's had a pet or seen kittens recognize they play. And he compares that to human playing. This is not in the ethics. But what he points out is then humans can develop rules. That's where the break takes place. Our children play just like young kittens and young dogs play. But as we develop, we become rational and we can develop rules for these plays, like the World Series. And that is what makes people different from the animals. Now, I'm going to throw in a curve here because in modern research, they've shown that animals are empathetic to each other. Even rats are empathetic. Rats will try to free other rats from traps. Elephants are empathetic. I don't know how we view that as empathy. We view as a virtue. I don't know how Aristotle would deal with that today in his hard line between rational human beings and animals. It's a lot to think about.
I like your bringing up that example. When my stepsons were, I would say maybe 10 and 12, 12 and 10, or 13 and 11, they used to have games with other kids, other boys, of course, their age at the nearby playground. And I would go in and watch them or watch over them, and they would spend half their time arguing about the rules of the game that they were playing. And other animals certainly wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And neither
Because
Yeah.
it calls for reasoning. To set up rules, it calls for reasoning.
Right.
And
And
animals
we still do that. And we still do that. I did that on the pickleball court the other day. We still do it.
yeah.
Well, it's a difference between playing and playing games. Games are structured there, and there's inherently some competition built into any game you play. I mean, there might also be other things like cooperation, but most games involve a certain amount of competition, which is
But
also,
I think that
I guess, human.
Yeah, go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Aristotle's rationality is like a practical rationality. Like you can think things through, and you don't generally see that in animals. But I think I read somewheres in this treatise that he doesn't ascribe that particular rationality to every human being. And he certainly did seem to exclude a lot of folks from his worldview. So
You mean the slaves?
slaves are among them, and I mean to a certain extent, women. And
Yeah, they have maybe a limited ability.
that's right, a limited ability.
Yeah.
I have some difficulty, I think, reconciling the idea of rationality or reason and the discussion we're having of friendship, and maybe even to some extent the discussion we've had over the past weeks about virtue and our assessment of good person. Because it seems to me that we all, and Forrest and I had an exchange about this. And I think one thing we agree on is that we tend to make a judgment about a good person through some sort of, I don't know, some sort of gestalt. We just know, we know it when we see it. We don't start with a kind of inventory. We start with what we experience sort of emotionally about an individual. And then we might go on to do the inventory if we think it's necessary. I'm wondering though, now, yes, reason enters in, because it's not long between the kind of gestalt experience, I think that's a good person, and a more rational process of explaining why they're a good person, or explaining why I'm getting something from that person, or at least understanding it. Whether you explain it or not, you kind of understand it using your mind. But the initial experience seems to me to be much more emotional than it is rational.
Let me interject. I think you're quite right. It's very, very much emotional, and Aristotle includes that in his assessment. But I'd like to remind you that this person that you admire, besides it being an emotional attachment that you have, either in the presence or at a distance, but that it relates to the actions of that person, the behavior of the person. So you find that person admirable because of what that person does. The virtues, remember, are always related to actions.
Well, does or is?
Is.
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 Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I had an experience. I went to a conference a year ago called the Lincoln Forum. It gathers together Lincoln fanatics from all over. It's in Gettysburg, and I was there with my brother. On the last day there, we were sitting at a table with a number of people we didn't know, including a couple. I thought of them as a young couple. Turns out they're as old as I am, which doesn't mean they're not young, but they seemed young. They're from California. They seemed young to me. They were sitting across from us. We exchanged only a few words, but one of the exchanges, this fellow said to me, I'm enjoying watching you interact with your brother who was there with me. He said, I lost my brother some years ago, and while it's sad for me to realize what I lost, I'm also enjoying. I've enjoyed watching you. Thank you, or something, as if I'd done anything for him. I can't tell you what a feeling I was of friendship that left me with. And it so happened that he told me that he and his wife were coming to Maine this fall, 10 months out. And they'd like to see me. I looked forward to that. These people with whom I had no history whatsoever. And when I didn't get a call in September, I was disappointed, but because I thought that's when they came in October. I went out of my way, to meet up with them. My wife couldn't believe. Who are these people? She said. and all I could say was, I just think they are terrific. And they were. We had a wonderful evening together. Entirely emotional. Yes, I knew that we shared interests and values, I guess. I sensed that. And the conversation that we had certainly confirmed that. So there was certainly rationality, reason, playing out in the course of this extended conversation that we had and got to know each other better. But it was emotion of an incredible kind that made me feel that these people were already my friends.
May I ask Richard a question? If these people turned out to be part of the Californians for Trump, how would that have affected your
It would have
friendship with them?
It probably would have killed it, but it would. But that question never even occurred to me, because I knew they weren't. Not to say that there aren't other people at the Lincoln Forum who are, by the way.
Yes.
But still, yes, that would have been theoretically possible, and I think it would have been a deal breaker. Would have been, extremely disappointing. I would have wondered what is wrong with me. But anyway, it fortunately turned out otherwise. I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, except to go back to my point about emotion playing such an important part, and reason then perhaps having to catch up with emotion.
But
what is it?
I like your example, Richard. What Aristotle has done is to give us a toolkit for reacting or understanding better our different kinds of relationships. For example, in this case, it was wholly incidental, wholly emotional, intuitive, based on hardly any actions. And here you go. So downstream, you can have this kind of analytical conversation about that experience.
Yeah.
And it's not as if there's a template that works for all situations, but the toolkit is very helpful.
Richard raises I think of a great point. If you look at the history of philosophy, and including Aristotle and Plato, and going all the way up to Immanuel Kant and Descartes, emotions are not they're not on the table for discussion. It's reason. Everything is reason. I mean, Aristotle, of course, I'm sorry, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Kant's famous book is The Critique of Pure Reason. Emotions just are not there. They're not, I don't want to say they're dismissed. They aren't even, it's like they're off the table so far that not that many philosophers until recently even dealt with them. It wasn't important. I mean, in Aristotle, I think you can infer it, because he does talk about you balancing and what your expectations are in terms of friendship, and giving in terms of friendship, which I think you can read into that a certain emotional context. But in general, in philosophy, just that wasn't part of what you were studying or thinking about.
Doesn't Aristotle pay more attention to emotions than all those other guys? They're all men, of course.
Well, I think so. I think he doesn't use the word, but he certainly talks about expectations and the balancing of what it means to have friends. I mean, they're based on action. He talks about actions, as you said, Forrest. He doesn't, but I think you can read emotion into that.
I think his work is so suffused with emotion that with the study of emotion, shall we say, that it brings me up short whenever he then switches to a discussion of reason. Remember when he threw that in and said, the highest form of goodness is the contemplative life, the life of pure reason. And I think we were all a bit surprised and thrown off by that, because it seemed so at odds with everything he did. And it still seems an odd fit to me when I think about him. I mean, that's not going to be my takeaway from the ethics, I can tell you.
But underlying all of these Greek philosophers was it not that they believed in the human soul, that humans had a soul? And I think if it's not too great a logical leap from that to figure that if you believe in the soul, you're going to believe that there's emotional attachments that derive from that. So that's how I picture it.
What about calling the soul the mind?
Well, I don't know. That's one of my issues, of course, is that everything comes back to what is discoverable, that's natural to you, and that can then be characterized as the mind. But I'm not sure that's what it is it?
I don't think you can get at the subject of the soul, however you define that, without not just using the mind, but your emotional intuition. Whatever the soul is, we talk about soul brothers and soul sisters, which is one of the words that appeared in my litany of friendships. What did I mean by that? Well, it's not purely reason. There has to be. Richard intuited that these people who he had just met circumstantially were like soul friends. And that was an emotional, unrational thing, which needed confirmation, action, and so forth. So it's a combination. Again, you have to pick up different tools in Aristotle's little box. And soul is a great word because we all understand, without being able to explain it, what it is.
This dichotomy that we're talking about between rational processes and emotional processes, I'm sorry, is reconciled and overcome in Hegel and in Nietzsche, where in the phenomenology of mind. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was running out of battery and I tried to put it on my phone. Sorry. I'm sorry, Ron.
All right. Anyway, so in the phenomenology of mind, I mean, I spent 2 semesters in college working my way through that book with a huge amount of effort. But anyway, essentially, I mean, Hegel tried to follow the path of what was going on in his head, some of which was emotional, some of which was historic remembrance, some of which was analytic and rational through and through. And he followed his mind's path by linking each episode of his mind's experience to the one that came before and the one that came after through this process he called Anschauung, overcoming.
Let's not go there, Ron, because that's really out of our 10.
I apologize. I got carried away.
That's okay. You're thinking. Those of you who read The Republic will remember that Plato divides the soul into 3 different parts. So there's the rational part and the appetitive part and so on. Aristotle pretty much agrees, doesn't he, with Plato that there are 3 different parts to the soul? I think that he does, in what we've read. So the soul isn't purely rational, that's simply one part of the soul. But it's the most important part because that's the part that distinguishes us from other animals.
I think that the person that Richard talked about who empathized with having lost their brother and seeing this, that was something that touched Richard's soul.
The emotional.
It was something that touched him to appreciate his brother more. And the couple that said, "You remind me of what my brother, what I had in my brother."
Yeah.
And that was, I don't know whether you can call that synchronicity or something. It's something, but it's something when people come out and have an action of that type, you can feel it right away. It. It's like it's there.
And you're right in calling that an action. It wasn't just something that he felt and that I knew he felt. It was something he told me he felt. He reached out. He made an effort.
And he touched your soul, or
Yeah.
you touched his, or whatever. It's just
Right.
something happened.
Yeah, right.
Excuse me, Forrest, could you remind us the three parts of the soul?
Yeah, the three parts are the rational part, then the part that has to do with bravery, and then the part that's just appetite, pure appetite, like nourishment and so on.
I don't remember that.
To look at it.
Mike, can you help me out? Has Mike disappeared? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope I haven't.
Oh, there you are.
No,
Yeah, can you help me here? Naming the three parts of the
yeah,
soul.
no, I think you're right, and I had not, but until you reminded me of it, I couldn't have come up with that answer. In part because Aristotle is so focused on actions
Going on.
and people doing things.
There's a chirping going on. Some alarm is going off. I opened as I tried.
And of course, he acknowledges appetites, but lust being one of them. I mean, my God, here he is, a Greek actually talking about something like that today we still blush when we try to talk about it. I think, because of his keen observation of human nature, I think that he, there you have the appetites and you have the actions and then you have reason. So yes, I think you're right, Forrest. I just had to be reminded of it.
Okay.
Well, I had an experience that may have combined some of these things. On Friday, I came back to town from being out of town. I went to the firehouse in Easton and voted. And as I passed through eight people touched me before I dropped my ballot into the box. And when I did, I was overcome by emotion and tears. And the man who was receiving my ballot looked at me sympathetically, but I couldn't stop having an emotional reaction. I said, I staggered away. I had combined my sense of virtue and duty and citizenship and rationality to act. And I was performing my civic duty. And I thank you, Forrest, and you all for this combination of factors to explain it partially to myself.
Well, Kamala would like you to act again and write a check.
Vote early, vote often.
No,
When I hit the Easton firehouse,
give
I
early and give often.
I was approached by the Republican. I went by the Republican kiosk and they asked me if I'd like the Republican ballot. I said, no, I'm a Democrat. And the gentleman said, we love you anyway. I said, well, do you also love insurrection? And that kind of terminated that. We're not friends.
Well, I'm always surprised at friends and neighbors that I know well or thought I knew well. And then to walk my dog past their house and the sign in their front yard is shocking. It takes my breath away.
Yeah.
Well, I can.
Okay, well, I've got there's almost no way that we can keep from going to politics at this moment in time, but I've got to stop us there.
Yeah.
But I also need to stop us here. As I said, I've been stimulated to a whole new thought about Aristotle's ethics, and I told you that I'm going to try to write this up, and I'm going to ask Mike and maybe Charlie to help, maybe Richard also to help me with the editing. But any case, I didn't want to take up our class time with it, but I think it's something you would appreciate if I do get it done. I've got so many things that I want to do that I don't get done. But this is something I'll try to work on, and it's something that I will share with all of you because I know that that you will have some understanding of what I'm saying and what I'm thinking about because of our shared experience in reading Aristotle. I must say, as some of you have said, you have been just a tremendous group to work with on this course. And I just really appreciate how much you all think. You are just really examples of good people in that respect. In other respects also, of course.
Of course.
Well, thank you all very much. I might mention, we weren't going to do this, Mike, but I want to mention in passing that Mike and I are trying to work on a course that we would co-teach. And it would be built around the question, what is reality? And now you all have had enough philosophy to know that you don't have to shy away from that topic. But anyway, I hope that that's another thing in your future, in our future together. Thank you once again.
Interesting.
It's been really glorious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, all.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. I
everybody.
really loved it. It's just, I have to reread the book. I'm looking at the back of it. It says, right and wrong is a human thing. Boy, is it.
Thank you, Forrest. Great.
Thank you, Forrest.
Everybody.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you.